Well, since the origin of humankind, there have been sightings of Yeti, Bigfoot, Sasquatch all over this planet. And a number of dedicated scientists and researchers have tried to get the answer to just what could this creature be, if anything. As a matter of fact, a long time ago, we were given this sound clip of what someone says was a Bigfoot. Who knows what that is? Just last week, a person in North Carolina took a 7-second video of something lumbering across the highway down there, and he claims it was a Bigfoot. You could see something. It was a creature, but it also could have been somebody in a costume. At coasttocoastam.com, under our Insta poll there, you'll see on the highlight page a poll going on about Bigfoot, where 52% of you right now still believe that it is a yet unidentified flesh and blood creature that simply has evaded capture. You can go ahead and cast your vote there as well. Tonight on Coast to Coast AM, we will have 3 special guests for you throughout the night. We will be taking your calls all evening long and your stories. Up next, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum joins us. Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science on Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Jeff Meldrum is an associate professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University. He's also an affiliate curator of vertebrate paleontology at Idaho Museum of Natural History. Dr. Meldrum has been investigating the ways monkeys, apes, and human ancestors get around. He's a regular on Coast to Coast AM. His book, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science. He's with us this hour on Coast to Coast, Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Jeff, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks. I'm just doing very well, George. Thanks.
Good. It's good to have you here. So many sightings of Bigfoot, some with video, some with not. They look like guys in costumes to me, Jeff. The most recent one I saw out of North Carolina looks like some guy lumbering across the road in a suit. I don't know. What's your take on some of those?
I'd have to agree with you on that. That happened over the spring break, so I was out of touch with the world for a few days, taking a little respite. But when I got back to the office, I was very underwhelmed by the quality of the video and the lack of reaction to it, which was a pretty good measure of its quality.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I guess the only silver lining to that type of thing is that it stands in such marked contrast to the quality of something like the Patterson-Gimlin film. And once more, it reiterates to those who would say that film is just a man in a fursuit. Compare it to something which is obviously just a man in a fursuit, and it's not so obvious to those who have a little understanding of anatomy and locomotion and obviously the history of this phenomenon.
I remember in school, Jeff, I was looking at a book, reading about the abominable snowman, Yeti. And I couldn't put it down. I was just fascinated by it. And I really didn't know much about Bigfoot or Sasquatch in this country. I was just a little kid. I kept reading about the abominable snowman, what's going on in the Himalayas. Right. And then a few years later, I began to hear stories about Bigfoot here and Sasquatch here.
Right.
And I, even at that young age, said, this has got to be the same species, the same kind of creature. That is all over this planet. What got you in this direction? What got you interested in this field?
Well, I like you. I kind of grew up on the tail end of that Himalayan craze and the fascination with the folklore surrounding the Yeti and the reports by mountaineers of footprints and sightings and so forth. And growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I eventually was, introduced to the Sasquatch, to the North American Bigfoot. And, in fact, Roger Patterson came up through Spokane, where I lived as a youngster, and showed his documentary that showcased the film clip from Northern California. And it certainly made an impression on me at that time and steeled my interest that was already growing in the direction of questions of human origins and cavemen and all things prehistoric, as many youngsters are fascinated with at one time or another. So that was my first introduction to it. But from a more professional level, I think we've talked in the past about my encounters with footprints in the field, first in southeastern Washington, in the Blue Mountains outside of Walla Walla, Washington. And I tell you, seeing fresh, extremely fresh footprints for that first time was really, I can only describe it as a life-changing experience. I mean, it certainly has changed the direction of my professional career of the past 18 years now, more or less. And it's hard when seeing that kind of evidence up close and firsthand to just simply turn away and walk away from it. And so I've been poking at this question from various angles now for quite a number of years.
And I'm sure we're going to get some phone calls this hour, Jeffrey, from people who have had incredible eyewitness testimony of these creatures. I mean, we've heard stories of baby Bigfoot throwing rocks at houses and all kinds of things. I mean, there's something going on. If you had to estimate how many of these creatures might be roaming just the United States region, North America, what would you say? A couple thousand, maybe?
Yeah, I think tops. I think that they must be very, very rare and dispersed throughout their habitat with large home ranges and not significant concentrations by any means. I mean, the footprint evidence doesn't seem to support that. It suggests no more than a handful of individuals in quite a large area, 1,000 square miles perhaps. But obviously we're guessing. They're educated guesses based on the implications of the amount of footprint evidence that we have and the frequency of encounters, reports of sightings and encounters. But I think given the elusiveness and the reclusiveness of these things, they must be very, very few in number.
Where would you rate them in terms of intelligence? We've got, chimpanzees, apes. We've got human beings. Would you put Sasquatch in the middle? Are they up there on the higher plane of intelligence? Where do you think they are?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion, and sometimes it's not based on real objective experiences, which makes it difficult. Some individuals have had very subjective personal experiences that cause them to conclude that they are very human-like in their intelligence, or, as you say, even existing on something of a higher plane of existence with extrasensory perception and the ability to communicate telepathically and so forth. My own personal experience, and that's the only thing that I can base my conclusions on at this point, in the absence of more objective evidence on the part of people who think that way, the evidence doesn't suggest something that human-like. When the genus Homo, of which we belong, we're one species, when it first emerged 2.5 million years ago with the earliest species of Homo, like Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis and so forth, the fossil record of skeletal remains was also accompanied by archaeological remains, the use of tools, stone tools that have persisted in the archaeological record, and other even more complex and sophisticated tools as the evolution of the human ancestry progressed. And with Sasquatch, we don't have any evidence of repeated tool use other than the types of things that you might see in the behavioral repertoire of other great apes, the opportunistic brandishing of sticks or throwing of stones. They don't seem to have permanent shelters other than occasional nests that are reported by some witnesses, similar to the type of vegetation nests that gorillas would make on the ground, or chimpanzees up in the trees, and so on. And so I'd have to say that the evidence for me points to something that's on par with a great ape. Now, there certainly is some room between the brain size and correlated intelligence of a chimpanzee or a gorilla orangutan and modern humans. And so, it could fall in between there, maybe a little smarter than a gorilla or chimpanzee. But honestly, I haven't seen any evidence to really suggest that. All their behaviors can readily find a correlate amongst those that have been reported for other primates, other great apes.
And I'll tell you, Jeffrey, what I find fascinating, I don't hear many stories of these creatures, these purported creatures, being violent, attacking human beings. They don't seem to do that.
Right. Well, yes, I think by far and away that seems to be the case. And it's interesting, the very few reports that the historical reports where such behavior is indicated, it's usually a case of the humans showing aggression first, taking shots at them. Like so the apes of Ape Canyon, the Mount St. Helens, the miners shot at one and possibly killed one. The Roosevelt story of Bauman up in the Bitterroot Mountains, they took shots at this creature that interloped into their camp and claimed that they hit it at one point, given the screams that it emitted at the time. And so, that type of behavior isn't surprising really at all. But then having said that, there have been some reports, some obviously Native Americans have traditions of them snatching children on occasion. And, the whole Sonequa tradition is that of a cannibal giantess that snatches up wayward children who are out past their curfew or in the woods alone and pitching them into a basket on her back and taking them home for supper, kind of like Hansel and Gretel. And they often escape. Usually they escape, but one of my close friends here that's a tribal member here in Idaho grew up down in Nevada, and they had stories of infants being snatched from the teepees during extremely hard winters. And it may sound like a just so story, but yet recently we've learned of documented cases in Africa where the drought conditions have driven the chimpanzee populations there to seek food in perhaps less conventional ways, and that's included snatching human children. And there was a period of about 7 months when there were 12 reports of human children being snatched by chimpanzees and killed and partially eaten. So it's interesting. I mean, I find that fascinating. It's a very unfortunate.
Well, Ed, we know chimpanzees can be very violent.
Absolutely. And so an animal of this size, under stressful conditions, may seek food wherever it's available. And if it's a little bundle of a child, then that's not out of the question, given the precedent that we have in other great apes' behavior. So these native traditions may actually be based on an incident, maybe a rare one, hopefully, presumably, but yet it was obviously traumatic enough that it became ingrained in their traditional stories and oral folklore.
You're a scientist. You're an anthropologist. You wrote a book called Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. What did that do for the field?
Well, my hope was that it would lay out sort of a baseline of what we know within a scientific context. I mean, what is the framework? For example, the instance that we just talked about. Can we place some of the behaviors that have been attributed to Sasquatch, some which seem to be odd and out of place for a primate, like living in a temperate climate or eating fish, which had never been reported for great apes until just a couple of years ago. Those types of things. Can we place them in a context and evaluate that evidence in an objective fashion? Is there an ecological context? Is there a possible body of evidence, of objective evidence in the form of footprints and hair that point to a consistent but as yet unrecognized entity out there in the environment? And I must say that I've found that it's been a very useful tool with my colleagues and with agency personnel. We've taken gone to great pains to establish networks and contacts with U.S. Fish and Wildlife agents and foresters and state game and fish personnel, and the book has been a very good tool to introduce them to the objective evidence that is there. Some of it inferential, some of it somewhat speculative and theoretical, but also the baseline of what we have at hand and how we might go about pursuing that definitive evidence. So I think it has made a very positive impact in that regard, and together with other, there's certainly other important contributions. Dr. Bindernagel, for example, has penned a couple of very useful books that have addressed the primate nature of this phenomenon, as well as the reluctance of the scientific community to acknowledge what in his terms the already past discovery of this creature, but yet the ongoing resistance to recognize and acknowledge that event.
Jeffrey, why can't we physically get one? I don't think we should be shooting them or anything, but we don't find the dead carcass. We don't find we can't get them. How come?
Well, there's no short answer. When it comes to the question of carcasses and bones, it's a vexing circumstance. It's a challenging lack of evidence. But when you consider it again within the context of what we know, the precedents for other animals that are living in wet, coniferous, forested habitats, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where the soils are often very acidic due to the volcanic elements within those soils and sediments, the preservation of bone is very rare. Fossilization just doesn't occur very frequently. About the only place you find fossils are in lake and river deposits or in cave deposits where there's an alkaline environment that's more conducive to the preservation of bone. But out in exposed to the elements and exposed to the scavengers, they're very quickly processed. Then when you consider the natural history, the nature of the creature, the fact that it is very rare, that it is long-lived, it reproduces infrequently. These are inferences that we're drawing based on an assumption that this is a large primate. And so extrapolating from other aspects of the life history of primates, I think we can safely assume that. Then a death, given their size, they're at the top of their food chain, they have no natural predators, perhaps other than humans. If they survive infancy, they'll live to a ripe old age. So a death amongst this very rare population of, very small population, is a very rare event. And, when you think about the number of other types of wildlife, much more common wildlife like deer, tens of thousands of deer die annually over winter. And yet when we go out hiking, how many carcasses and skeletons of deer do you stumble on in the woods? Precious few, because they get scattered and recycled very, very rapidly.
Pulled off, eaten away, and things like that. Well,
exactly.
That is a good point. There's some fraud in this field, as there is in just about anything. That's got to tick you off, Jeffrey. It does me sometimes.
Well, it does. It's frustrating because it's very easy for the critics and the skeptics to become fixated on the poor evidence, the frauds and the hoaxes, and just the poor interpretations of some individuals. And so that makes it all the more important to put more credible, more objective, more accurate evidence in their hand. And again, that's one source has been.
Well, we're going to take phone calls, Jeffrey, with you when we come right back, and I want to talk more about what you're working on. That's next on Coast to Coast AM. Well, we had our chat today with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, author, dream expert. And for just 25 cents a day, you can do the same thing by being a Coast Insider. Simply go to coasttocoastam.com and learn all about it. Coast Insiders, of course, formerly called Streamlink members. And we'll be back in a moment. We'll take your calls and continue our discussion this hour with Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. And each hour, a new guest will come in as we talk about Bigfoot and Sasquatch on Coast to Coast AM. And we're with Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum this hour as we talk about Sasquatch, his book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. Jeffrey, what are you working on now these days?
Well, in the lab, we're continuing with various analyses of the footprints. We have created a virtual archive with most of the specimens that are in my lab, and although the site's still under construction, it is accessible through the Idaho Museum of Natural History webpage, and that's going to form the basis for more quantitative studies to compare the footprints and with data from other hominid fossil footprints and analyses of human footprints, etc. And then I have a student who's been working with me trying to bring up to date the analysis, the morphological analysis of the hair samples that continue to accumulate in our lab here. And now that Dr. Fehrenbach has retired, I've encouraged him to kind of throw in his resources and his conclusions, and we're working on a collaborative paper that will be presented at some of the meetings this year, presenting some of the initial findings of the fact that there continue to be hair samples that defy identification, that defy attribution to any common wildlife, and yet clearly show the consistent presence of some primate-like entity out there. So that's great. And then in the field, we're taking a different tack and shifting our emphasis from attempting to get hair and camera traps to the use of search and recovery dogs, who are being a couple of which are being trained specifically for identifying tissue of great apes, primates, and their scat as well. So with the hope that we can find more scat samples that will let us know more extensively about their eating habits and what resources in a given area they're using, but then also with the idea of maybe finding some physical remains, some bits of bone or the remnants of a decomposing corpse, as you mentioned, and that could go a long way. A single diagnostic bone or a tooth, a single isolated, could really tip the scales in as far as identifying this creature.
Gorillas sleep generally, just right out in the forest, in the jungle? Do they sleep in caves at all? And I'm wondering, where do these creatures sleep?
Right. Well, yes, gorillas typically just create nests in the forest. The larger males are usually on the ground. Sometimes the females will nest up in the canopy, where they can fold branches in and create kind of sometimes a very elaborate hammock of sorts, a platform of vegetation there. We don't really know. It's likely that if these animals here in North America are enduring the winter climate, that they are denning in overhangs or caves or some other type of shelter. But for the most part, during the summer season, what few reports that I'm aware of that make mention of nesting behavior, they're out in the open. They're in just bedding down on mats of vegetation. I have seen one such mat that was very possibly a Sasquatch bed, given the size and the depth of the vegetation that was accumulating, collected in this instance. It looked like it had been accumulated over the winter, and as just a layer of insulation on top of the snowpack.
All right, let's take some calls here. Ian is in Tampa, Florida, east of the Rockies. We'll get you started. Go ahead, Ian. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hey, it's a pleasure to speak with both of you tonight.
Sure thing.
My story is from back in the fall of '95. I'm from Oregon, and I was bow hunting with a buddy of mine out south of Hood River, south of Mount Hood area in the Cascade Range.
Mm-hmm.
And we were driving along some mountain area, and we found a spur road that we were going to go down, and we were scouting for elk. And so we drove down. It was real tight road, tight logging road, very overgrown. Didn't look like many people had ever been on it in a long time. And when we got to the end of it, it was looking out over a clear-cut valley. and nothing was going on for half an hour. So we turned around and we were driving the truck back out the road. And I'd say we went about a quarter mile, and it was getting dusk time at that point. And a tree had fallen over the road, and this pine tree was a good maybe 2.5 foot diameter, probably 30 feet tall, maybe a little shorter, but a big tree, a fresh tree, not a dead tree, not a snag. And it looked like it had been shoved over on the road, on this very narrow road. So we were stuck, but luckily we had a winch on the front of the truck. So I got out and I winched up the tree, and we were able to back up and yank this thing up. We got the worst, creepiest feeling that tree had been pushed over on purpose by something, and we didn't think it was a bear. We didn't see or hear anything other than that, but it was just freaky. And we got that tree shoved. We moved so fast. Like, we barely even had that tree out of the way. I jumped back in the truck, and we hauled tail out of the mountains. So now
that's interesting. You know, how many people are freaked out by these creatures, Jeff?
Well, yes. I mean, it is a commonly reported experience, and you know, we can only speculate on the basis of that kind of a reaction, whether it's just the unexpected, the fear of the unknown, or whether there's something more visceral taking place as a result of some sort of interaction. But I've often spoken with seasoned, hardened outdoorsmen and hunters who, after such an experience, will swear they'll never go back to that spot again, and they don't go out in the woods unarmed any longer. And so you have to wonder what precipitated such a visceral reaction to that kind of an experience.
Let's go to Jerry, truck driving in Texas. Hey, Jerry, you're on the show. Go ahead.
George, good to talk to you guys tonight. I was going to need to ask your guest there what he thinks about that documentary that was probably made back in the 60s about that tracker that had caught a clip of Bigfoot walking down through a creek bed there before he got out of range. I'm sure he's familiar with familiar with the film clip, but I'd like to know what he thinks about that. And there was an experience I had. I was elk hunting up in Montana, kind of southwest of Kalispell out there, and I was sitting in a tree up there and really didn't see anything. I got down and it was dark, and I want to tell you what, George, I felt something looking at me. My adrenaline kicked in, my asthma kicked off. I didn't know if I was going to make it back to the truck. I couldn't get back to that truck quick enough. It scared. I'm a good-sized fella, and it scared me almost to death.
Jeez. What is it about these creatures, Jeff, that make people so freaked out?
Well, like I said, we can only speculate. In my book, in the chapter on vocalization, I broach an interesting possibility, and that is that they may be capable of generating infrasound of a high enough intensity that it has a visceral effect on witnesses. There's some all sorts of interesting literature that talks about the effects of acoustics on the function of organs and the reaction by receptor sites within the brain that can affect mood and psyche and even states of consciousness. So the litany of animal species that have been now documented capable of producing such infrasound in various and utilizing it in various capacities has really grown tremendously. And while there has not been definitive studies conducted on great apes, they certainly have the plumbing in the form of extralaryngeal air sacs that would allow them to potentially generate and project that kind of a infrasonic blast. By infrasonic, it wouldn't be perceived audibly, but yet the effects of that vocalization might be perceived in the form of fear or or elation, or nausea, or disorientation, and those are all responses that various witnesses that I've interviewed have at one time or another have made mention of. So, the gentleman asked about a film back in the 60s. I mean, other than the...
Sounds like the Patterson film.
Well, right. I mean, as far as I know, that's the only clip from the 60s. And so if it is the Patterson-Gimlin film, I'm quite convinced that that's the genuine article. We've examined and re-examined from so many different angles and so many different perspectives, and based on the anatomy, based on the nature of the gait, based on the correlated and well-documented footprints and the action of the feet that can be seen in the film itself, I'm quite convinced that that's the best photographic evidence and stands as the most compelling piece of visual evidence that these creatures exist.
Do you think the Yeti sightings in the Himalayas and the Sasquatch sightings in North America are the same species?
I don't, because the descriptions of their appearance and their behavior are rather distinct. Although, and the footprints that have been attributed, the very few of the many reported footprints that provide enough detail to allow us to assess them, suggest a foot that has a divergent big toe, much more like a gorilla or a chimpanzee. Probably the best tracks that have been attributed to the Yeti were documented by the McNeely-Cronin expedition to the Iran Valley in Nepal, and very well documented, very fresh tracks, and they essentially look like a large chimpanzee. But there have been other tracks that have been found in some of the lower elevations that are remarkably similar to Sasquatch tracks, however. One that I'm fairly confident about, its credibility, was brought back by Josh Gates, the host of Destination Truth. And so, some may say, well, that wasn't anything like a scientific expedition or qualified observers. But based on the footprint itself, I can bring out of the drawers in my lab examples of tracks from the Intermountain West and the that are almost indistinguishable from the track that he brought back. So that suggests that maybe there are two species within the larger Nepal region, that whatever the Sasquatch of North America is, it has its correlate in Asia in the form of the Chinese Yeren, or the Mandiburung in India, or the a Sasquatch-like Yeti form, whatever you want to call it, the Tsute. And I know that there are some who say that Tsute is nothing but a brown bear, and that may well be, but a larger, more Sasquatch equivalent form. And when you go right along the foothills of the Himalayas up around to the Pamir and the Tian Shan and Altai Mountains in Georgia and Mongolia and over into the Caucasus, there continue to be well-documented instances of footprints that are virtually indistinguishable from those attributed to the Sasquatch in North America. So we suspect that Asia was the source for a North American primate. So it makes sense that species probably had a fairly widely distributed range throughout the mountainous forests of Eastern Asia, Central and Eastern Asia, and may still linger as relic populations in some of those now isolated areas throughout that region.
All right, let's go to Vicki in Villa, Washington. Hey, Vicki, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Good evening. I have a story that I want to tell. My in-laws live in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and one day we were up visiting them, and they live out in the country, and they have like 160 acres, and then they border national forest land, so there's a lot of property up there. And one night we were sitting around in the house, and we could hear these coyotes fighting with something, and you could hear about 6 coyotes fighting with this creature, and this creature had the voice like when you guys did the intro of that sound that you thought was a Yeti or Bigfoot, and they were fighting with him, and they were losing. My father-in-law, who is a mountain man, he lived in northern Idaho his whole life, was really freaked out about it and went and got the gun, and he wouldn't let anybody go out of the house. And we all knew that what they were fighting with was not a cougar, and it wasn't a bear, because none of us had ever heard that sound. Well, where my in-laws live, I said Borders Forest Service, they also have found like little caves, or my mother-in-law would go for a walk and she goes, you know, she would smell really funny stuff. And one time she found like a little small cave where there was grass and hair that she hadn't seen before. And so she would tell us about it, and they had built a pond where some water was, and they have footprints, and they have pictures of the footprints. And so I do believe that maybe there's one living up there. And I just thought I'd tell you guys that.
Yeah,
And
no,
my cousin is from Walla Walla, who used to go up into the Blue Mountains and look for Bigfoot. So you probably know who my cousin would be if I mentioned his name.
What's his first name, Vicki?
His first name is Wes.
Wes.
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
what is it about the state of Washington where there seem to be so many sightings, Jeffrey?
Well, I think that the core habitat for these creatures that was originally, or has been, continues to be the temperate rainforest of the Pacific Northwest. And by far the greatest extent there from the Olympic Peninsula and throughout the North Cascades and on down, you know, all the way through the Cascades of Oregon and into Northern California. That's the one of the core habitats, which probably supports some of the greatest densities and therefore has the most frequent encounters. Here in the Intermountain West, the reports do tend to be a little less frequent, and part of that is just the behavior of the local human population. Idahoans have historically been rather tight-lipped about this subject and not been willing to share their experiences to the degree that other geographical areas, populations in other geographical areas. So, for example, you know, the suggestion that you have photographs from the Bonners Ferry area would be very interesting to me, because we have very little in the way of footprint evidence from the state of Idaho. I'd love to take a look at those if you can get in touch with me.
All right, get them to Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, and I'll be back in a moment as we talk next with Daniel Perez, author of Bigfoot Encounters Past to Present on Coast to Coast AM. With our special report on the search for Bigfoot up next, Daniel Perez joins us. His work, Bigfoot Encounters Past to Present, so get ready for that. And welcome back. Daniel Perez founded the Center for Bigfoot Studies and started the popular Bigfoot Times newsletter, which he both edits and publishes. The newsletter, well known among Bigfoot investigators for its hard-hitting, sometimes controversial critiques of even the most prominent Bigfoot researchers in their work. Perez is considered by many to be an authority regarding the circumstances surrounding the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film. And here's Daniel Perez on Coast to Coast. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi there. My first time being on the show, so I'm real excited.
It's a perfect time for you, too, isn't it?
I think it is. Just right on the heels of the publication of a young adult book called Bigfoot Encounters Past to Present that myself and a fellow artist from Illinois illustrated, Stephen DeMarco.
Oh, that's exciting. You know, people of all ages are just fascinated, Daniel, with Bigfoot, aren't they? How come?
It's one of those mysteries that you don't think is really happening, but it really is happening. So it's like a double mystery to me.
What do you think Bigfoot is?
Oh, that's a good question. It's one that I think about not a whole lot, because I don't think it's of consequence now. I think until something is actually collected, it's just like that's an open question. It's just like you'd say, well, maybe we have Neanderthal running out there, or Gigantopithecus, which is a popular theory. But in the end, it's just like until we actually have one, it's going to be an open question.
Some people think that the creature might be dimensional. Do you?
You know, throughout the years, that's come up, and it's just like over the years there have been a lot of popular writers, especially like in the mid 1970s when there was a lot of these pulp magazines out there that kind of addressed that type of issue, that said, well, it's a space traveler, it's interdimensional, blah blah blah, and my idea about that is it almost appears that we have something like that, but when you back up and maybe take a better look or a harder look, I think it's the rarity of the species that makes it almost appear like it's some goblin from another dimension. Take for an example like myself, I've been in the woods many, many times, but I've never seen a mountain lion. So although I know they exist, if I didn't have enough knowledge about the topic, I would say like, well, since I've never seen one and I hear about them, then maybe it's a space traveler. I'm making reference to mountain lions because of the rarity of species. And I think because of the rarity of species is that it almost appears that you've got something that's interdimensional or a time traveler.
Tell me about the Center for Bigfoot Studies, Daniel, and then we'll get into the search for Bigfoot.
That was in 1984. I founded the Center for Bigfoot Studies with the flashy acronym of CBS, but it really doesn't mean anything, and I've emphasized this over and over. The Center for Bigfoot Studies is largely just a holding tank of information by way of physical files, electronic files, newspaper clippings, and book files, a library. And it's just like, it is probably one of the largest ever assembled here in North America.
Now, when they say that sometimes it's controversial, what do they mean by that?
Meaning, what are you referencing to?
I mean, it's parts of your investigations and your newsletter and your information. It's pretty controversial sometimes. You go after people if you have to.
Absolutely. It's just like we try to get everyone to toe the line. And just recently, last year, September, October, we spent 2 months on the issue of the Skookum Cast. And I said, well, it's been 10 years since September of 2000 that discovery was made in Washington State. One of the finders was, God, I'm bad with names here, Derek Randles from Washington State.
All right.
So I invited him. I said, would you be willing to be interviewed for this discussion about the matter? And so we gave him more than just the 4-page format of the newsletter. We gave him just more than 4 pages. We went into the next edition from September to October to let him have his say, so to speak. And after we finished with him in the October edition, we had quite a few people who had the opinion that the Skookum Cast did not represent nothing more or nothing less than just elk in that part of the country. Mm. And so when that was also put in the newsletter for balance, Derek Randall said, well, something to the effect that it seemed like it played out just perfect to your agenda. Please don't get in touch with me anymore. So that was the end of that.
Wow.
And it's just like we gave him the opportunity to speak his mind on the matter, and it's just like when things didn't go necessarily his way, then that's when things kind of fell apart.
Daniel, the frauds have got to really upset you, don't they?
Yes, and in fact, less than a week ago, I guess, this North Carolina video where this individual was driving across the road, and it's just like, I guess actually not, several people emailed me, and I kind of put on my thinking cap, took one look at the video, and I said, I don't even want to hear the interview with the individual. It's just like you can plainly see what you're seeing there is just a costumed individual.
And you'll go after people like that. I mean, we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just like that's why to the general public here in the United States, it's just like they just look at the whole matter as something akin to the Easter Bunny, a waste of time, a mythology, folklore, fantasy, just a subject to have fun with. And it's just like something better on the cover of National Enquirer than National Geographic. And so because of that, it's just like everyone thinks it's just a big, silly joke.
So far, Daniel, what do you think is the best evidence out there that proves the existence of this creature?
Oh, Running Away, in my opinion, was the film shot by the late Roger Patterson in October of '67. And Roger's since gone, but Bob Gimlin is still living, and just an incredible witness, and in the sense that he's never changed his story about what happened from his initial major interview with Jack Webster, which was like late September, early October of 1967. And, it's this extraordinary thing that happened, and, it's been 40-some-odd years, and he's still saying that this is what happened, and that's basically it.
What do you think that creature is that's on that film?
Wow, again, that would require speculation, but in terms of, whether we're looking at a Bigfoot or whether we're looking at a man in a costume, and, Bob Hieronymus is the most likely candidate for being the man in the costume for those people in that camp. It's just like, I've investigated not just the film, but the film site, the circumstances surrounding it, and created a massive bibliography just on the primary sources on the PG film, the Patterson-Gimlin film. And I'm absolutely convinced that what you see there on that strip of film, the 953 frames, is Bigfoot.
And tell me, what did you mean by Bob Hieronymus could be the candidate?
Bob Hieronymus, as of late 1999, he was, I guess, a Yakima newspaper writer put him out there as making the claim that he was the guy in the costume. And something like that could have been potentially very important had it emerged, say, like in 1968 or 1969, because it's Bob Hieronymus, who lives walking distance from Bob Gimlin in Yakima, had that claim came out, say, in 68 or 69, and he went to the newspaper and said, well, what you see that's unfolded in the Associated Press and the UP and on television, etc., is not Bigfoot, but that's just me in a costume, because he made the claim that Roger Patterson would pay him $1,000 U.S. currency to do that stunt. Now, in 1968, $1,000 was probably more than what people made in a month, a normal U.S. worker. And here he got gypped out of that $1,000, and it seems like he should have cried foul back then. And when you start to do digging, newspaper archive digging, etc., it's just like, it's just not there. It doesn't emerge till about 1999. And so I would say, I said, you can't be a Johnny-come-lately and jump on the train and say, like, oh, I was the guy in the costume. And by the way, he's not the first and not the only individual who claims that he was the guy in the costume.
Which really taints the whole thing in terms of, I'm not saying taints the authenticity, but taints the people who believe that it was a fraud.
Right, absolutely. And it's just like, another thing that most people don't realize is that prior to May of 2009, a fellow by the name of Bill Muntz that lives here in Hollywood, that's part of the Hollywood community of special effects, started taking a better and deeper look at that movie film in terms of trying to determine how tall the subject is. And by doing that, he used something that is almost that would have to hold up in the court of law, because in terms of simple mathematics, say like 3 plus 2 equals 5, that will always be, if you have 3 plus question mark equals 5, it's always going to be 2. So Muntz used the optic formula that is widely used in photography to determine that the subject that you see in that film, that close to frame 353, that the photographer, videographer, filmographer, Roger Patterson, was approximately 100 feet from the subject matter, where they call it the look-back sequence. And at about that distance right there, using that optical formula, that subject is roughly 7'3", and there's a plus and minus variance as to, okay, it might be an inch taller, inch shorter, etc., but it's got to be locked into that height. And Bob Hieronymus does not even approximate that height. And just backing up a minute, in May of 2009 in Yakima, they had the Bigfoot Roundup in honor of Bob Gimlin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went up to be part of that event. And also, when I was up there, I said, well, I've been to Yakima a couple of times, but I said, most people know my personality, that I would maybe not challenge, but I said I was curious enough to find out exactly how tall Bob Hieronymus was. So I'm 5'7" tall. So I went to his home, knocked on the door, and out emerges from the side door was Bob Hieronymus, and he was at best maybe 5'10", at best. Now, this is an older individual, and say like maybe in 1967,
he stood up a little.
Maybe he was 6 feet tall,
yeah.
But he was not the 7'3" tall that was required to be in that epic movie.
And clearly, this creature was walking with the strength of its feet, so it wouldn't be like it was on little risers or anything like that.
No, all that business about arm extensions and about wearing slippers and having pillows in the buttocks, it's just like when you start to really look at that film on a frame-by-frame basis and the careful scrutiny that Bill Muntz and Dr. Jeff Meldrum have done, it's just like you're seeing something that is very unique in the sense that it appears that everything is what you see is what you get. You're really seeing a foot there. You're really seeing a hand there. You're really seeing a fleshy, massive buttocks from the behind and not a pillow in a costume. Because the pillow in the costume and everything else, it would be very discernible in a costume. And when you look at that piece of film, and it's just like that subject matter does not have the look and feel of a costume, because a costume, if anything, would conceal rather than reveal the muscle masses that you see moving in the movie film.
What's going on with any potential DNA work, Daniel?
I guess David Paulides and I want to say the NABS, North American Bigfoot Society or whatever, is they're trying to get this DNA analyzed to be unique and different than modern man, and it's just like, stop right there. It's just like if you back up to the late Eric Beckjord, who collected blood samples from the Lummi Indian Reservation from the mid-1970s, he was actually one of the first people to start a line of thinking along the ways of trying to have some DNA blood analyzed, and he actually was somewhat scientific about it at that time, hoping that that you could do this type of study and come up with results that are unique and different than Homo sapiens. And it's just like, back then, he was not conclusive in any of his findings. So I suspect that any findings that they produce from 2011 even forward is again going to come back inconclusive or different than modern man, like hair samples that have been analyzed. But it's just like, it's not going to resonate with the scientific community in North America, because the DNA sample is going to say, like, and they said, well, you can't fake this, you can't fake this. And the late Grover Krantz, when they had, in 1982, when there was a major or semi-major press conference with regard to the ISC, the International Society of Cryptozoology,
right,
and the dermal ridges that were found on some plaster castings that were associated with Paul Freeman, Krantz said something to the effect that even if these plaster castings were found in a New York garbage dump, that it would be impossible to fake these dermal ridges. And it's just, there again is a matter where it's just like, it didn't hit home, it did not resonate with the scientific community. They didn't all say like, oh my gosh, he's right. And it's just like, we should go jump on the bandwagon. And it's just like, it was just another event that just quietly went away. So with regard to any DNA stuff, it's just like, and the stuff that was also collected, I guess, from the Monster Quest episodes, I guess, they did some stuff like that, collected from an area in Canada. I can't think of the name. But there again, it's just like, even though you might be coming up with stuff that might be unique or different than modern man, it's just like, it's not a defining piece of evidence in the sense that people are saying, oh my gosh, this is it, we told you so. It's just like, it seems that what it's going to take is the carcass of a body.
All right, stay with us, Daniel. We're going to take phone calls and continue our discussion to get some more of the great stories you've got on Coast to Coast AM. Well, next hour, cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman talks with us about his work. When we come back, we'll take your phone calls with our guest, Daniel Perez, right here on Coast to Coast AM. Daniel, outside of the Patterson-Gimlin film, what case do you see as one of the best?
Oh, the one that happened November 17th of 2005, that was also the photos of the subject that was up on Silver Star Mountain was on your website then, Coast to Coast. And that was the matter of Randy Chase. And when that happened, I saw the BFRO website, and I guess those photos were shown on several websites or a couple of websites. And I was immediately impressed by the images. So without even trying to get a hold of the witness, by 2006, I had driven up to Silver Star Mountain from the north side and came in I said, well, I'll figure out where Silver Star Mountain is and just go and have a look for myself. And that whole area is very impressive. It's prime Bigfoot country. And so when I got back home, I didn't meet the witness at the time. I didn't find the correct location at the time. And then by, I guess, Christmas of 2008, somewhere around there, Cliff Barackman was at my home, who's a well-known Bigfoot investigator from Washington State, had stopped by. And he was in my home office, and we were just chatting about things, about certain cases, talking about stuff, Bigfoot-wise. And I said, well, it sure would be interesting to know who RC was that's mentioned on the BFRO website. And for those people who don't know, BFRO means Bigfoot Field Research Organization, Field Researchers Organization. RC was the initials for Randy Chase from Washington State. And so that's what Cliff told me, and I said, do you have his contact information because I want to interview him? And so unlike a lot of what I would call drag and paste Bigfoot investigators that only do their work via the internet and a website. It's just like I do get out in the field and I do interview people. And so when Randy consented to be interviewed by me, I phoned him and I said, well, I want to ask you about these photos, blah, blah, blah. What were you doing up there? And he said it was a hike up in this country and something that he did often. And that when he made this hike, November 17th of 2005, he had asked a friend of his to go up. And the temperatures, the weather conditions were absolutely frigid, I think in the early 30s. And so he gets up to the summit of this area, and he's something that he had hiked before in different types of conditions in the summer, etc.
So very familiar with the area.
Right. And so he says he gets up there and he sees this big rock that was out of place, and it starts to move. And so his first reaction, he has now this is in 2005, but even then he had, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess a 3.2 megapixel camera, which even then was a kind of a dated type of digital camera.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's still a very functional camera. And so he pulls this out of his day pack and takes, correct me if I'm wrong again, but two shots of the subject that show motion. And then the third shot, and I had to ask him about this, is of the Columbia River. And I said, I can't imagine that in the heat of the moment that, you're taking your eye off the ball to just take a shot of the Columbia River and not keeping your eye on the ball, the subject that's moving, that you have no idea what it is. And then the third shot of the thing parting away. So it's subject, Columbia River, then the subject again. And when you blow, I think it's either 1 or 2, when you blow up the digital image very big, you see the profile of the subject, which looks remarkably like a silverback, a gorilla in profile. And it's just like, so when I was up there in May of 2009 in Yakima, I had arranged immediately after the Yakima event to go see Randy Chase, and I said, would you be willing to go up to the mountain to show me where everything took place? And so one of my first experiments, and he agreed to do that, so we made a hike up there. And so one of my first orders of business was to see, like, at that distance, which was one of the arguments that it was just some guy hiking up the mountain from the opposite side who was just all dressed in black, like a skier or whatever, but all black clothing. And so I had Randy Chase as my test subject, and I put him where the subject was seen, and I was standing where Randy was, where he got these photos, in the immediate rough vicinity. And it was very clear with the naked eye, with my camera, with his camera, that clothing was easily discernible. So even if there was black clothing or black jacket on top of a black shirt, that you would have been able to discern that. Because with Randy, it was like there was no question about it. But when you see his images, there's not a hint that there's any layered clothing or anything, just a very dark image. And I think, after talking with him and spending a day with him, I'm very impressed with him as a witness and by his images. And he just doesn't have that. He's an electrician by trade, the same as me.
He doesn't have that fraud persona, does he?
And he doesn't have the electrical technical know-how to do anything like that. He's just not that type of individual.
Let's go to the phones, Daniel. Tom's telling me that someone saying that she's Leslie Patterson from Kennewick, Washington on the line. So let's go to Leslie first of all. Hey, Leslie, how are you?
I might have to call back. I think I'm losing the battery on my phone.
You've been on hold for a while, haven't you?
Yes, my father-in-law was Roger's brother. It was a big rodeo family, and I saw the thing about Bob Hieronymus one time, and they know all these any cowboy, because Lester provided stock for all the rodeos, and I asked my husband if he'd ever heard of a fellow named Bob Hieronymus, and he said he'd never heard of the guy.
Tell me about the film. I'm sure you've seen it quite a bit, Leslie. What do you think?
I just still find it so astounding that after so many decades, it's just nobody has definitively been able to tell.
But you think it's authentic? Her phone.
I would lean that way. I mean, it's around the family. You do not joke about being the guy in the suit, for sure.
No, not at all. Not at all. Leslie, I'm going to put you on hold, and I want you to give Tom your phone number. We'd like to get you back on another program, if not later on today, Daniel. But small world, Daniel Perez, isn't it?
Yes, that's interesting to hear her voice, relative of the Pattersons there.
Next up, we go to Thomas in Cleon, California. Hey, Tom, thanks for holding.
Oh, hey, thanks for waiting for me. It's really an honor to be on after Leslie Patterson, too. And Daniel, I really appreciate what you're doing. I've got a question about what Art Bell originally brought up, that he was afraid that the first Bigfoot encounter would be a dead Bigfoot. And you mentioned people thinking maybe these were cougars. Some friends of mine in Albion thought that they may have heard of Bigfoot, and they said, no, it was not a cougar. We had a story in the news tonight about another cougar being shot, and the cat was a female 100-pounder, just afraid in somebody's backyard, which I contend, that's really their living room where we build these houses. And if there's an injured Bigfoot somewhere, I'm concerned that Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, the law enforcement people might come out and end up shooting the animal, the creature, for public safety purposes. And it seems to be so close to us, that would be absolutely tragic. Is there some way that the professionals that are researching this, the scientists, could maybe put together the BFTF, the Bigfoot Task Force, and maybe the Coast audience could support a protocol where if a situation arises where one needs to be dealt with, that it could be tranquilized? We tranquilize elephants, and your careful calculations indicate to me that there should be some way to formulate a safer way to deal with one of these creatures so it doesn't have to die, and could be, if it's injured, could maybe be medicated and then healed by a veterinarian.
Well said, Thomas, and that's one of our fears. As a matter of fact, about a year ago, I got a call from a ex-Marine who said he was going out there to shoot one. I hope I talked him out of it, Daniel. On one hand, if you're being attacked, you got to defend yourself, but generally, as I was telling Jeff Meldrum earlier, they don't show any signs of being aggressive to humans, do they?
No. In fact, let me back up just a second. Just a shameless plug for the Sasquatch Summit, which is going to happen next month in honor of the work of John Green. And just so some of the cryptozoologists and the people who study Bigfoot, Green was mentioned in Ivan Sanderson's book in 1961. And there's not another person on the planet living that can make that distinction. His work has spanned over 50 years. And in his database of work, there's really the percentage of aggressive behavior on behalf of Bigfoot is less than 1% of the overall reports here in North America. But addressing the gentleman's question more specifically, in terms of a distressed Sasquatch, and there's people in the area, you could only wish that could happen. It's just like no one on the planet to date can make an appointment with the Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And it's just like I've yet to hear an example of anything like that where you have a Sasquatch that's incapacitated or something to the effect where, you could, instead of shooting it, you could come out and rescue it, so to speak. It's just like, like I said, we could only wish that could happen. And when Mount St. Helens blew in May of 1980, it's just like there were a lot of rumors that came from that time about, that Bigfoot was in need of help, blah, 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 and they brought these black unidentified helicopters in, and they collected carcasses, they collected live specimens, et cetera, et cetera. But then again, you have to look at that with a very critical eye, and it's just like forget the anecdote, forget the story, show us the proof.
All right, let's go to Rich in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's been on hold almost an hour. Rich, go ahead.
Hey, how you guys doing tonight?
Good, Rich. Thank you.
I just want to bring three things to the table here. One, could people be scared when they see the Bigfoot or have a suspicion that maybe a Bigfoot is there because of the fear of the unknown?
Sure, absolutely.
And two, maybe the Yeti and the Sasquatch and the different variations, or maybe a different, like the animal adapted to its environment instead of being different species. Maybe it adapted. Is that possible?
What do you think of that, Daniel? That we're talking about the same creature, but it's changed a little bit because of wherever it is.
Yeah, I would say that's a possibility, that what you have, say, on the Asian continent could be the exact same thing here in North America, but is adapted to its environment and possibly turned into a different species, if you will. I don't. It's possible, but again, it's just like, for me, that's thinking outside the box in the sense that it's a complete non-issue. It's like, well, you can continue to debate and question that piece of information for a long time, but you'll never know until you have a specimen or a blood sample or something like that to actually do some really detailed studies, whether it's the same thing or a different species.
Okay, and how about your last question there, Rich?
Could it be possible that the sightings and they're not finding a carcass or anything like that could be maybe they're nomadic species?
Of a what type of species?
Like they're nomads?
Oh, a nomadic species. Yes, I would go for that, and it's just like I don't, it's just, again, those are questions. It's just like if someone were to ask, and I've been researching the problem for since about 1973, when I got involved by the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, and it's just like, all I can tell you is that I have more I don't know to the question rather than let me tell you what I think. And in terms of like finding bones and stuff, why we're not finding it, etc., it's just like, I don't know.
Let's go to Abilene, Texas. We've got Olivon with us on Coast to Coast. Hi, Olivon.
Hi, sir. Good show tonight.
Thank you, sir.
I got interested in Sasquatch because I seen Legend of Boggy Creek too. That's when I first got interested in it. But in 1989, me and my wife was going home from Odessa back to Seguin, and we got in Big Lake, and it was real late at night, and we were both sleepy, and she says, well, let's count deer eyes on the side of the road. I said, all right. So we started counting. We counted about 4 of them, and I reached down in the floorboard, and I was messing around in the floorboard for something, and I heard her say, there's a deer, and I started raising up, and I was looking at this creature, and I said, that ain't no deer. She said, that's a bear. I said, no, ain't no bear either. And we passed it. She just pushed out on the gas, and we spun past it, and I kept telling her, stop, stop, stop. I guess she stopped about a mile after we passed it, and I said, go back, I want to see what that was. And she says, no. And I had goosebumps all over my legs, my arms, and everything, and I told her, I said, you know what that was? And she said, what? And I said, that was a Bigfoot. And when I got home that night, I went to sleep, and I had a dream about what we saw, and it was everything all over again. It was a slow-motion dream. And when I looked up, I seen the same thing, but I seen what it was carrying. I thought it was carrying something hairy, but it was holding something hairy, and it was a blondish-looking color. And it was a female, I guess, that was holding it, and she had her head buried in his chest. But when I got to Ozona that night, before we got home, I told the police, I made a police report about it. And it was back in October of 89. And I made a police report about it, and they wrote it down. I just told the people, I didn't want to tell them what I saw was Sasquatch. I just described what I saw. And they said this, and that guy looked at the other man, he goes, well, sounds like a Sasquatch sighting.
Yeah, they're probably pretty used to that. Daniel, there was a call I had about a year ago. Individual was fishing. He caught a couple fish. He said he came face to face with a Bigfoot, and the creature was looking at the fish, so he figured, I better give it to him. He handed them over to him, and he said that the creature looked at him, gave him one back. I don't know, but that tells me there could be some intelligence here.
Yeah, I mean, a report like that, it's just like, that's interesting. That's interesting because it's just like when you're confronted with first something that's on the edge of reality, and then to hear a story like that where the subject has taken the fish, gave you one back, it's just like it borders again on the unbelievable, but it's just like, why couldn't something like that have happened?
Absent. Daniel Perez, thank you so much. Daniel's website is part of our coasttocoastam.com. On our Twitter feed, you'll find some pictures that Daniel was talking about posted there. Lex has them there for you already. And I will be back in a moment with Lauren Coleman, cryptozoologist, on Coast to Coast AM. Up next, to Coast favorite, Lauren Coleman. One of his recent works, True Giants, is Gigantopithecus still alive? Lauren is next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, Lauren Coleman, constant researcher, and introduces us to the fascinating world of cryptozoology, the study of hidden animals that is truly gaining popularity. Lauren is one of the world's leading cryptozoologists and backs up his assertions with hundreds of years' worth of source material, plus extensive field work on the subject. Here he is, back on Coast to Coast. Lauren, my friend, how are you?
Great, George. It's good to be here. I was afraid you were saying I was hundreds of years old, so I'm glad we got over that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we threw in the source for material. But you know what? You've been around on this planet long enough to know so many creatures that are probably hundreds of years old, aren't they?
Oh, I think we've got some old creatures around, yes, and I've been doing this. I just celebrated my 51st year of being involved in cryptozoology, so I guess that does give me some kind of legacy.
Absolutely. What's new with you, Lauren, since we last talked?
Well, you know, I've been pretty busy, been traveling a lot, California, Point Pleasant, West Virginia last weekend to do a little Mothman update, but some of this Bigfoot stuff is getting kind of crazy out there.
Oh, it really is. What do you think of that little video of that North Carolina case?
Oh, well, the Shelby, North Carolina case is really kind of remarkably laughable. I mean, the guy looks like he's catching the bottom of his costume on his feet. You know, he's shuffling across. This was taken March 22nd in Rutherford County, North Carolina. The guy says he was out there with his video camera and Mr. Tom Byers. And I'm not sure if he was fooled or he's trying to make a fool of us, but it certainly looks like the person in the suit even stops to wave at the camera. So it's quite funny at one level, but on another level, it's really sad that these YouTube videos are getting so much attention. It's really kind of undermines all of the serious research, of course.
It really does. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf, Lawrence. One day we're going to get some great material, and people may say, it's another hoax.
Yeah, well, I think that happens already. You get good sightings, or, you know, there's the whole possibility about this footage everybody's talking about, and they've been talking about for 3 years from Kentucky. Supposedly it's being analyzed, and the trailer's already out about various scientists, like, you know, our good friend Jeff Meldrum is in the film and all of that. But until we actually get a body, whether it's hit by a lumber truck or accidentally killed by a hunter or whatever, until we actually get a body or a live capture, people are just going to laugh at these videos.
Have you heard anything, inside information, that somebody has a Bigfoot captured any place? Does that ever come up?
Oh, it comes up all the time. It really does. Of course, we sometimes see it have ridiculous endings like the Georgia hoax 2 years ago. But the whole little buzz that's going behind the scenes right now is whether or not some of these DNA samples from this Kentucky case, are they already contaminated with human beings? Because that's one of the problems that always occurs with DNA samples, is in actually collecting it. Are you then ruining the sample? And one of the things that's already coming out about that, that's sort of leaking out, that somebody's going to be coming out with some new findings saying the DNA sample from this Bigfoot is human-like, and that's going to change the whole field. But the thing that I have to stop and say, wait a second, if it's contaminated with human DNA, then naturally you're going to get results back that will really intermix whatever Bigfoot DNA was there with human, and so that could be a confusing picture of what we think the appearance of this creature's like.
You know, Lauren, since you've been investigating the search for Bigfoot and other researchers as well, we continue to get great stories. You just mentioned the hoaxsters, the frauds, buying great costumes and things like that. Are we ever going to bust out of that and really get a creature and be able to check him out?
Well, I think so. I think that one of the things that we see in the whole evolution of the discovery of new species is, of course, during the 19th century, the Bigfoot of Africa was the gorilla. And now we don't even think about it twice. The mountain gorilla exists, giant panda, coelacanths, all of those are really the past stories in which we don't think about them, how unknown they were and how mysterious it was. And so it's almost as if this critical human psychological threshold is crossed when we discover it. So yes, I think we'll discover a new animal that is, like the Range Pindek of Sumatra, or the Bigfoot Sasquatch of America, or even Yeti. Those kinds of things will happen in the next 25 years. And for maybe 6 days, it'll be remarkable, and then everybody will say, oh, of course we figured something was there. And then we'll go on to the next big, celebrity cryptids, as I call them.
You just finished a new book. I mentioned the title with researcher Mark Hall on True Giants. Tell me about that.
Well, True Giants is really a radical approach even in the Bigfoot field. Of course, I always want to keep at the cutting edge. So True Giants looks at these reports that have kind of been at the back of some of the file folders of researchers. They've kind of known they're there, but they don't want to talk about them. They're almost embarrassed by them. And it's reports of Bigfoot-like creatures that are bigger than the 8 feet that we usually get. The Bigfoot range is really about 6.5 feet to 8 feet tall. But there's always been these reports, from Asia, from North America, like a very classic report from Pitt Lake, British Columbia in the 60s of a creature that was 15 to 20 feet tall. So there's this really very common description of creatures that are upwards of 15, 20 feet tall. They leave four-toed footprints, and that's a real indicator. And they're also a little bit thinner than usual Bigfoot. Bigfoot tends to have rather large muscles, and if it's a female, the wide hips and all of that, and the mammillary glands, so that you can see that they're nursing mothers and stuff like that. But these true giants, it's almost as if Mark and I, talking this over and really wanting to write the book, humans have this almost survival ancestral memory of giants, and we've nicely put it at the back of our minds. We defeated the giants maybe, thousands of years ago. Giants were all in the earth, and that's, obviously a common expression from the Bible and all of that. But just looking at it as a sort of species tradition that we have in our memory, and then we want to bring this up, and we want to say, look, it looks like there's still surviving areas in some wilderness areas in Asia, and maybe the Pacific Northwest, where these creatures are huge. They're, relatively peaceful, but they have this violent part of them in which there's been this battle between giants and humans for a long, long time. The giants really had us running for a long while, and we, of course, defeated them. That's why you have ancestral memory stories like Jack the Giant Killer that became Jack and the Beanstalk. And those are really there to tell us we can defeat the giants. We don't need to be afraid of them, but also to not forget them. And that's what the book really wants to look at, the true evidence of creatures that are still cryptids, still part of cryptozoology. But even Bigfoot researchers want to ignore these stories, and we don't think it's not the time to ignore these stories anymore. So it's a kind of a very exciting story, and really on the edge of maybe even more new discoveries in that area.
You just mentioned something about Mothman, that you've been doing some work in that arena. What's going on there?
Well, what, of course, happens is people never forget Mothman. Mothman, just for those people that haven't heard about it, of course, and I can't imagine anybody listening to the show wouldn't, but in 1966 to 67, there were over 200 accounts of this giant, over 6 feet tall, a creature called Mothman with big wings and red eyes, and seen in the Point Pleasant, West Virginia area. Well, there's been some new documentaries coming out, and one of the most bizarre things is one of these new documentaries called Eyes of the Mothman was filmed for several years. Then the director got sick, could not get out of bed for essentially a couple of years. One of the cameramen was charged with stalking Trump's daughter, Donald Trump's daughter.
Yeah.
And he appeared on a videotape this week after his bail was revoked, in which he says that he blames the Mothman movies and the Mothman for causing him to be the stalker.
Oh.
And this goes into some of the research that I did, that there seems to almost be a Mothman curse. You remember the days whenever the Mothman movie came out in 2002, there were lots of automobile accidents around Point Pleasant, lots of people dying. And there does seem to be this bad luck connected to Mothman. So we'll just kind of stay away from that topic a little bit. But there are still sightings of Mothman, and that's what the important thing is. Mothman, of course, was a word that was invented by a copy editor in Ohio who was a fan of the Batman series on TV, and he wanted to come up with a shorter name for the headline. The witnesses at the time were really calling it a big bird. And if we think about it cryptozoologically, there are lots of big bird sightings. They're called thunderbirds.
That's right.
And they're in different parts of the country, Pennsylvania, the Ozarks, Alaska. Not much different than Mothman.
And I was just going to ask you about these big birds. Do we get any sightings of prehistoric birds, the pterodactyls?
Sure, we do. We get sightings. Some of the best pterodactyl sightings is the Congo Mato, which is in Africa. The other reports, like I investigated and went down to the Yucatan in the 80s to investigate reports that people were filming pterodactyls, and what they turned out to be was fricate birds. And so you can imagine albatross and fricate birds looking far away in the sky have that kind of sharpness to their wings so that people would actually say that they're seeing pterodactyls. It's going to be very hard for pterodactyls to survive because, of course, they're from 65 million years ago. So it's the explanation that they're actually something more mundane and common does happen.
Lauren, what was that incredible story we used to talk about a bird that came down and picked up a little boy, and the mother ran out with a broom and swatted it, and it dropped the little kid?
Well, that was the Lawndale, Illinois case of 1977 in Illinois, where this boy Marlo Lowe was running around his front yard. He had one of those shirts, those tank tops, and two of these birds swooped down on into the yard and actually caught him by the straps and carried him about 15 feet in his yard. All of the people from the Lowell's house came outside. There was about 7 of them in a semicircle and started yelling and doing everything like you were talking about, and the boy got dropped. But it turned his hair gray. The family was harassed by kids from school who left dead birds on the boy's porch and different things like that. It's not easy sometimes to be a witness to some of these creatures because, of course, you can lose your jobs, you can lose your wife, you can also lose your hair because it becomes such a psychologically impactful experience and a trauma that people really don't leave you alone about it.
No, not at all. Well, it's a field, Lauren, I think it's one of the best. People are fascinated with cryptozoology, and
it's becoming very popular. That's right.
Absolutely. Now, tell me about the Sasquatch Summit that Daniel Perez was telling us about.
The secret meeting of the Sasquatch Summit? No, I'm just kidding.
What's going on?
Well, in British Columbia, in Harrison Hot Springs, the second weekend of April, there's a gathering of probably 100, 150 of some of the top names in the world from Russia, from Canada, from United States. We're all getting together to kind of put our heads together about this whole Bigfoot field. It started out as a tribute to John Green. John Green, of course, is the elder statesman of Sasquatch chronologies. He's written a lot of books in the 60s and 70s. John Green is 84 years old, and a lot of people decided, why should we wait for his funeral? Let's celebrate with him while he's alive. So it was a John Green tribute that now has turned into a Sasquatch Summit, and it's very exciting. There's not too many places where people left as far as tickets and stuff, but I'm hearing about some of the people that are coming there. It's quite a blue ribbon list. So a few of us, myself, Meldrum, and others, are going to give tributes to John Green, as well as talk about his legacy. John Green, I knew him since about 1962 when I saw his name in Ivan T. Sanderson's book about the abominable snowman. And in that book, he talked about the Bigfoot and John Green. And Green actually started corresponding to me when I was just a young whippersnapper. And he said, I was the youthful age of his son, so he was going to talk to me. And he mentored me in many ways. And he said, there's not enough people looking into the Native American legends of Bigfoot and Sasquatch. So Mark Hall and I, who just wrote the book True Giant, we haven't really been working together. We've been working separate. But one of the first things we ever did together in 1969 was write a paper together on all the Bigfoot legends that turn up in Indian and Native American and First People tales, which is a good way to see that these kinds of traditions and folklore have been around for a long time and have a real history beyond the white people, of course.
What's going on with this report of a dog being born to a sheep in China? Come on, what is this?
Yeah, I know. It's I was called by reporters yesterday, and I kind of I said to them, just start looking at the report. Well, this report says that a little woolly dog, and you can see some of the pictures online, different places, and it's a little puppy. A farmer a sheep herder comes across this dog. He said that was being licked by a sheep that had just given birth to it. But there's absolutely no eyewitness testimony saying that the dog actually was birthed by the sheep. It's just that one kind of association thing. You have a little young newborn puppy being seen close to a sheep that's just given birth to other sheep, and you're going to have that maternal instinct certainly show up there. But it's almost as if there's different versions of the World Weekly News in China or something, because they seem to be getting bored and they're really promoting this story in the last couple of days. So I think it's going to be that kind of one that's going to become viral. And so I just thought we should at least try to head it off at the pass there, George.
Lots of bizarre things going on this planet, Lauren, no doubt.
Oh, yes, indeed.
We're going to take some phone calls with you when we come back. Now, the book, the brand new one, True Giants, is it out? How can people get it?
Oh, it's online all over. It's an Anomalous Books published book. It came out December 1st, so it's quite available now, and it's actually been doing fairly well for a book that's, of course, not getting much attention because people are kind of scared of the radical theories in it.
All right, Lauren, you stay with us. We'll come back. We'll take phone calls next with you on Coast to Coast AM. Well, on our next Coast to Coast program, Clint Marsh joins us. He's an expert in psychic powers and mentalism. Should be a fascinating program right here on Coast to Coast AM. Lauren, what's going on with the world's only cryptozoology museum?
Well, we've been very successful. Thousands and thousands of people have come